everybody. Welcome to the FCA Locker Room, the show where we explore how faith and sports come together to transform lives on and off the field. I'm one of your hosts, Vincenzo Pepe. We have a great episode for you guys today about the pressures that Christian athletes feel to fit in, especially at the high school and the college level, fitting in with their teammates in the locker room, and just the norms that society kind of has for athletes, and how Christians can kind of combat that and what they might feel, and how Scripture actually shows us how we can get through those things. And today we have, as our guest, we have one of my friends and coworkers, Brandon Gettig from Rochester FCA. He's gonna be diving into this with us. You know, he has some personal experience. He works with athletes now at these levels that are really fighting this battle, so to speak. And it's a huge part of what we do with FCA, right? Is just how do we stand out? How do we let our light shine in areas that typically doesn't, or our culture thinks that maybe it shouldn't? So, Brandon, thanks for being on with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. This is a definitely a cool topic, one that means a lot to me, but just the whole, platform, the podcast, wanting to combine sports and faith. I feel like this is something that could really make a big difference for a lot of athletes and coaches, young and old. So yeah, just honored to be part of it.
Awesome. So, before I ask you to give a little bit of your background and kind of your role with FCA, I'm going to ask you a hard-hitting icebreaker question.
Ooh,
This,
okay.
this probably this probably will be the hardest one of the day. Like when I wrote this out, like I had trouble with my own answer. So, if you had to survive a week with only three items that you could find from a sporting goods store, what would you choose and why?
Ooh, that is pretty good. Yeah, this wasn't in the template of questions, so you're
No,
putting
I
me
did
on the
not
spot
send
here.
this to you ahead of time. I wanted to hear it
First
right off
thing
the dome.
First thing that came to mind was like a sleeping bag. I feel like that would be a big thing. Like sporting goods, that usually has like an outdoor section, so
Yep,
probably
yep.
all my items are going to come from there. Um, I don't know, assuming it might be somewhere that's going to be cold, I'll go sleeping bag, flashlight, to be able to explore when it gets dark, and then I don't know, something a lighter is something to start a fire. You can
All
probably find
right.
something in an outgood store. Yeah, outdoor store for that. So.
All right, that's solid. That's solid. Yeah, I was struggling with this myself. I was like, do I go with a baseball bat just in case I need something? But I was like, that's not too practical, but I like it. All right, so yeah, Brandon, tell us, your role with FCA, and then maybe a little bit about your coaching and your playing experience.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, by title, I'm an area representative with FCA. So, um, one of the members of FCA that's kind of out in the community, trying to meet with as many people as possible, whether that's coaches or athletes, to do ministry, particularly for me, like campus ministry. So, there's two colleges in Western New York that I serve at, Roberts Wesleyan University and Houghton University, and then a number of high schools in the surrounding area where I try to help athletes start FCA huddles right there at their school. So it's been a privilege to be able to kind of serve primarily in those two spaces. In addition to FC, I do coach also. I coach college baseball at Houghton University. So I've been with FCA for a little over 3 years now. But before I joined FCA, I had coached 2 years as an assistant baseball coach at Houghton University, and that's kind of where my connection to FCA came when I was coaching there. I kind of had already started to feel like God was calling me towards ministry, but didn't know exactly what that was going to look like. We didn't really have FCA where I was from growing up. So it was a newer concept to me, but when I heard that it existed, I felt like that was an opportunity that I could kind of use what God's, placed in my life with just a passion for sports, as a way to share him with more people. So yeah, in addition to FCA, I still coach after I left Houghton to join FCA. I stopped for about 3 years and then just started back up again, coaching baseball at Houghton University. So doing that currently, it's been nice to kind of scratch that itch again a little bit, being away from the game for a few years. And yeah, so baseball was my primary sport. I played baseball in college at Penn State Du Bois, so a small, branch campus at Penn State University in Pennsylvania. But growing up, I also played basketball and soccer and tried a year of football, but I was kind of small, so I don't like getting hit that much. But yeah, I really love like pretty much any sport. I just love
Disc
the
golf.
competitive nature. Yeah, I do that a little bit in my free time. My brothers kind of got me into that, so it's something we bonded over a little bit and still
Yeah.
enjoy. So
How's the Houghton baseball season off to it? How's the start going?
it's been good. We took our spring break trip to Myrtle Beach and we went 4-4. So it was a little bit better than last year. Last year the trip was rough, so it was good to get off to a better start. And then we were on a 9-game win streak that just ended yesterday, unfortunately. So we dropped our first one and then picked up the second one. So I think that puts us at 10-5 now. So pretty good start. And then we just
Nice.
started conference play too. So
Awesome.
we're rolling. Hopefully we'll be able to keep it up.
Yeah, there you go. And what conference are you guys in?
Empire 8 conference.
Okay, nice. Um, so appreciate you sharing a little bit about that because I think it's relevant for this topic and just because you've gone through some of this stuff. I know you and I have had that, some of these conversations. You've gone through those feelings of needing to fit in, but knowing that maybe some of it wasn't the right thing to do in God's eyes and according to Scripture and things like that. So, I guess would you say that in high school? Would you say that you were a Christian in high school?
Yeah. I'll share a little bit about, more how kind of my faith journey started and how I came to Christ. I started learning about God at a younger age. Both of my parents were Christians by the time I was born, so I'm very thankful for that they raised me and my siblings in a very Christ-centered home. So I was spending a lot of time in church and in youth group, with kids my age at a pretty young age. And then I also every summer would go to like a Christian summer camp, and that was another place that was like really instrumental in like the foundation of my relationship with Jesus. Just learning more about him, and then just being taught that he willingly gave his life, on the cross for our sins to pay the price that we deserved, and then rose back to life. It was like, man, I know I've messed up a lot in my life already, even at a young age, and realized like I do need a savior. I need somebody that, well, not just anybody, but Jesus being the only one that could pay that price. So I was 13 when I accepted Christ, uh, but still had a lot to learn. Didn't fully understand even what that meant at the time, but just knew that that was the right step to take, and wanted to place my faith in Him. But yeah, it was interesting because after that summer, when I made that decision, not a whole lot changed. Just in my day-to-day life. You go back to school and things kind of went back to normal for a little bit, and it I'm like, well, I expected to feel a lot different. I don't feel a whole lot different yet at this point. Um, but the more that I started to try to be serious about my faith and follow what God said and draw closer to Him, it definitely became tough because you face decisions a lot of time in your life where when a lot of people are doing one thing that you feel like isn't something that might honor God, you kind of have a choice to make of, do I want to kind of go do what they're doing, or maybe choose to stay by myself, or stand up for what I believe. And so those types of decisions that can definitely feel lonely at times when you feel like you're kind of the only one that's not joining in something. So I would say high school was definitely a tougher stretch of that type of experience. I had some definitely a good like church family with some other really close families that were really good support, that had other kids around my age. So I had a really good community in that regard. But when I wasn't with them, it was definitely a little bit tougher, especially like in the sports environment, because they're not right there next to you, to kind of lean on all the time,
Do you
just
have
to support you. So
do you have any experiences come to mind when you say like, you know, especially in high school when you started feeling some of those pressures to fit in and yeah, people were helping you, but they weren't always there. Like what were some of those experiences maybe that you felt that pressure was kind of creeping in?
yeah, well, I remember it's funny that this podcast is called The Locker Room, and it was like really the first locker room experience that I had was like the huge eye opener because youth sports you don't really have a locker room per se. You just kind of show up to the field or the court and do your thing. But I remember like seventh grade football, like the first time I was ever part of like a football locker room. Um, it was just like, whoa, this is like an eye-opening experience because I don't remember how we probably had 40, 50 guys on the team. And there's like some supervision, like the coaches try to do their best, but for the most part, like kids are kind of just in there doing whatever. So it's a lot of like the typical locker room, guys kind of picking on each other. Um, a lot of like definitely a lot of like sexualized joking. I think that's pretty common just like with guys in general.
Sure.
But it just wasn't what I was used to or an environment that I had been in. So it was just kind of like a little bit of a shock of like, oh man, like it's, just kind of a rougher experience, environment. And I'm like, I don't know if I really want to like join in with a lot of this stuff. But I found out pretty quickly that like if you're not someone who joins in, you usually become like a target for the jokes that are being made or whatever. So um yeah, and like I said, I was always really small. So I was like, yeah, I don't really want to be the target of a lot of these bigger dudes that could probably throw me around. So I'll just try to like kind of stay quiet and stay out of the middle of anything that's going on. Um, I ended up, like I said, I only played football for 1 year, so it wasn't like that, that big of a deal. But similar types of experiences like that, where could just be conversations that are happening or, um, you know, ways that some people are being treated, where for me, it was like looking back, wish I would have done more to step up and maybe help some people out that I knew I should have helped out. But my approach at the time was like just kind of keep my head down and try to stay out of things like that in terms of not wanting to join in. So it's interesting. I think a lot of those types of experiences end up sticking with you, like even in maybe a subconscious way sometimes, throughout even, adulthood. So it's like having those experiences now, I kind of lean back on them to say like, oh, would I have acted differently in that moment? Probably. All right, sweet. Let's make the right decision the next time I'm in a situation like that. So
So looking back, if you could tell your little seventh grade self or, high school Brandon, if you could give yourself some advice, right? Because I think exactly what you're explaining is probably a lot of younger athletes experience when they go to, middle school and high school and they're in the locker room because there's no teachers, there's no staff, there's no coaches usually, right? Like, so things can kind of get out of hand. So like I think a lot of people feel that, but if you go back and tell yourself something that would probably also be relevant to people listening today, what would maybe some advice be?
yeah, I mean, I feel like there's so many different ways you could take this and kind of run with it. I think for younger kids that are maybe like newer to sports or just trying things out, um, it would be just that it's okay as kind of cliche it's going to sound like it's okay to be different. Like it's okay to not be like everybody else. And some of it ties into like, having your relationship with Christ being your first priority. But even for kids who maybe don't know Christ yet, don't have a relationship with God, um, there's some sense of like, right and wrong that you have, and it's okay for you sometimes to be the one that needs to step up, um, to speak out for other people. Because I think what I've seen a lot throughout my life is that typically you're not as much in the minority as you think you are, especially in a situation where like there might be, um, some kids or something like that making some bad decisions where there are other people that might be thinking the same thing as you. They're like, hey, this probably isn't right, but I don't want to be the one to step up and say something because I don't want to be kind of like joked about or singled out. I think oftentimes you'd be surprised like how many other people probably feel that way, but are just too scared to say something. So, you can be the one that helps out those people too. But it just takes a little bit of courage to be the one to do that. But yeah, I think in the sense, maybe a little more generally in terms of like fitting in within the sports culture. I think our culture doesn't do a great job of like creating room, honestly, for uh, individuality. Like there's definitely a lot of benefits to like the team culture and being part of like your tribe, being part of your group. But it's really easy to get put in like boxes. Like, if you are an athlete, just inherently there's things that people believe about athletes that anytime you kind of stray from that, um, from the stereotype, you're kind of seen as like an outsider or, an outlier of like, oh, that's not something that athletes do. So why are you doing that?
Mm.
And I feel like a little bit for me, that was more of my experience. Once I got through kind of like middle school to high school, it was less of like those, like momentary things. And it was more about just like a lot of things I felt like about my personality and interest that I had, especially with being a Christian, like didn't line up with that stereotype of what it meant to like be an athlete or like to be a jock or whatever at school. So it was tough to felt like I fit in with a lot of the athletes, just because I felt different than them. But then, you try to go maybe make friends elsewhere, sit somewhere else at lunch or whatever. But for those people, you're still seen as like the athlete. So it can just be a very like ostracizing experience where it just doesn't feel like there's any place that you kind of like belong or fit
Yeah.
in. So I think that
I'd
would
say
be the
too, I
other.
think, sorry,
Oh,
go ahead.
I was just going to finish that thought and say like it's okay, um, to be like a more well-rounded person than just like the sport. Like it's okay to have other interests than your sport, or even little things like it's okay to care about your grades and to be a good student. Like it's okay to want to be disciplined and like obey your teachers and obey your parents. I feel like that some of the even little things where I was like a pretty good student because I wanted to do well in school, and that's like more of like the nerdy thing to do than it is to be like an athlete, something that doesn't quite fit the stereotype. So it's
Yeah.
okay to like be somebody who doesn't have to check all those boxes of just what the typical quote unquote athlete looks like.
Yeah. I definitely think, like, looking back at my high school, maybe not as much high school because I went to a really small high school. So it was kind of like everyone kind of knew everybody anyway. So we were all somewhat friends to some degree, but definitely in college, like I was really just glued to like my baseball team. And so like there was no real like friendships that were happening outside of that. Like there were people that I knew and like, you're in class and you have a group project with someone, so you kind of get to know them a little bit, but there was no like real friendships outside of that. And so that's definitely something I do regret is like not not going outside of that circle, my team circle, to make friends and have new experiences and get different perspectives because everyone on my team kind of felt the same way about everything, right? It's just like very group thing type of stuff. So it is very hard, like in that situation, to then separate yourself from something that you don't feel comfortable doing because everyone on the team is doing it, right? But and like you don't really have another source to go to, right? Like you don't have another friend group that you can attach to, or all right, this isn't. I don't agree with what this is happening. I still want to play ball, but like I don't agree with that group of guys. But like who else can I go hang out with, right? So I think that kind of led to a little bit of me too, like trying to figure that out. I think one piece of advice I would give to young athletes right now, also kind of struggling with this, is, dude, like go work your butt off, like train hard, like hone your craft. If it's baseball, if it's softball, volleyball, whatever it might be, like be the work as hard as you possibly can to be one of the best players on that field or ice, whatever it might be, because then that's like athletes just kind of have that respect, right? Like if you're a good player, like it doesn't matter if you're the quote unquote weird one, or if you're the one like not hanging out with everyone, or you're not doing the things that everyone else is, because it's like, all right, this dude just like struck out 9 dudes last night, or he just put up 40 points last night at the game. Like, all right, we're going to respect his choices and his decisions, and then you also become a leader, on the field, and
Yeah.
that then translates to the locker room too. Like if people are looking up to you on the field, now they're going to start paying attention to what you do in the locker room or in the classroom or whatever it might be, and then you could start to set that example. Now I get that not everybody is going to, listening to this, that's in that situation, is going to be the best player in your team. We have people that are going to be the bench players, right? They're not going to be in that starting rotation. That's okay. But the harder you work, the better teammate that you are, regardless of how you feel everyone else is acting. Those things stand out, and those are the things that people eventually begin to respect a little bit more, and they pay attention to a little bit more. And then that's when maybe it's like, all right, well, let's get to know this person a little bit. Like, oh, what is different about them? And then you have that opportunity to, you know, present whatever you feel encouraged or empowered to do at that point. Um,
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah,
yeah. And
100%.
so, how do you think those pressures of the fitting in, how do you think it changes as you get to the college level? Right now, you're dealing with adults, right? Like everyone on your team is now an adult at this point. There's really like everyone's on their own. They're self-sufficient to a degree, right? Like the parents aren't there all the time. The coaches are a lot less hands-on probably with kind of what's going on outside of the sport. They're just focused on the athlete. So how do you think some of those pressures evolve or change or just completely different at the college level?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some things that I've seen that are pretty applicable across the board. I can only speak mainly on my own experience, but some things working in ministry and coaching too, I think are pretty broadly true. You kind of touched on it, but for a lot of kids, college is like your first time really being independent. And that's kind of how it was for me. I mean, I grew up, um, like I said, with a really supportive family, great parents. And then going away to college was the first time that I didn't have them, right there with me to be like as direct guidance in my life. I remember my freshman year, the fall of my freshman year, my dad helped me move into college. And then I was living with five other baseball players at the time. I had a house with, there were six of us teammates. And we're like, hey, classes haven't started yet. Still nice out. Might as well just go to the field and start, getting some work in, ahead of time. So we went to the field. My dad dropped me off, and then he went home. And I'm like, whoa, like it's finally setting in. Like I'm here by myself. Like my family's not here. This is like the start of a new journey, a new chapter of my life. And I'll be honest, there was a big part of that I liked because having that experience growing up, especially more in the high school, where it was similar for me. You mentioned growing up in a small town, in a smaller school, grew up in a similar area where a lot of people know a lot about you, and there's pretty much like not anyone that you haven't met. So for me that was kind of frustrating because it felt like a lot of people thought that they knew me pretty well, but it's like there's parts about me that you don't really know that I want to be that person, but when I am that person, I don't seem to fit in as well. So for me, college was exciting because it was a chance to almost kind of start over. Like I could go somewhere that no one really knew me, that no one knew my family. I didn't have these like expectations or pressures to succeed and like achieve really high levels of success because I didn't really have a reputation coming into that point. So it was freeing in that regard. But definitely like again, just the experiences that you have in college, I think are similar for some people to high school, but different if it's not the type of experience you grew up in. So like when I went to college, the big thing was like, um, going to a state school where like it was pretty small. There wasn't a whole lot of like activity on campus outside of like classes and sports. It really just was like school, baseball, and then like nightlife. So I had a lot of teammates, but I kind of felt like I was the only Christian on the team. I didn't really meet any guys early on that um, were at least like very vocal about it or seemed to live out their faith or was like a priority for them. So again, it went from wanting to be in that type of environment to going from high school to college. Like, man, I still feel like I'm kind of alone, like isolated. Again, it's kind of like the only Christian on the team. But I at least had an experience to, the opportunity to try to, like I said, create like a new identity or just be like a new person that no one really knew. So um, that was for me the first time really getting into like kind of like the party scene because I didn't get much into it in high school. Just, kind of was under a lot of supervision with parents and had some good influences. But then in college, it's like, oh yeah, I don't have like my parents right over my shoulder, like making sure I'm doing all the right things. They're not waking me up on a Sunday morning and like forcing me to go to church. So some of those like as those good influences kind of like faded out of my life, it started to get like replaced with, again, just wanting to be one of the guys and not wanting to go through that experience again of being kind of like isolated on the outside. Um, so yeah, I remember I think it was like my freshman or sophomore year, like going to the first party on campus with the baseball team. And I'm like, man, I've never been in this type of environment before. So I feel like I'm like going through the becoming a man process that I feel like a lot of guys go through when they get to college. And for me, that was like the experience I had where like, okay, this is what it means to be like a man out on your own. Because this is what I see my teammates doing. This is what I see like other guys on campus doing. And it's just like this is the college experience that I feel like everybody gets pitched. Like you go to college, you have your fun, you try to do well enough in class so you're not ineligible, and then you go play your sport, try to do good in your sport, and then you go celebrate after practice or a game's over. And so that became, again, it was like I don't feel like I really want to necessarily do this, but I don't want to go back to being like the only weird Christian kid again. So I'm like, I'm just going to join with everybody else is doing. Um, but it definitely took a lot of, I hit a couple, I guess I would say like rock bottoms later on, like my junior and senior year of college, where my faith was in a pretty rough spot because of some bad habits that I developed those first couple of years, and just like God's faithfulness throughout all of that, just the way that He kind of like brought me back to Him. And I can share more about those situations too. Not that those specifics are, I feel like, as important to the conversation, but just the way that He was like able to just kind of like help me strengthen my faith again, and especially like bring people into my life, whether it was like teammates or other like leaders in college that really helped me strengthen my faith again. Uh, Helped me see that like that doesn't have to be the only option for like your college experience. And I'm like, looking back, I'm like, man, I wish I would have realized that sooner and be able to have more like of an influence on the people around me, because I was able to start to see that like my last couple of years. And that's one of the things I try to talk about with, especially like in college ministry now, helping like college students understand like 4 years is going to go by quick, and like you don't have to wait around to have an impact on the people around you. Like you don't have to be a senior, especially as an athlete. Like you don't have to be a captain, you don't have to be a senior to have a good influence on the guys around you on your team. It just takes some intentionality and some courage to be willing to do it.
Yeah. I think one, if you are high school or college, really, especially college, though, if you're in that position, hopefully your campus has an FCA huddle on it. If it does, I suggest you go seek it out right away, right? Because you're going to be in a room full of athletes that are in the same position with you as you, of like that pressure to fit in, struggling to fit in, but understanding that like God is the most important relationship, and like then you're going to develop those relationships. Maybe they're not always going to be people on your team, but they're going to be people that are in athletics, right? And there's everyone, just because it's a different sport doesn't mean that they're going through anything that much different, right? When it comes to pressures of fitting in with the culture. So something like that, or find another group on campus if there is a Christian group or something like that. Sometimes it's as simple as maybe, um, just inviting one or two, your closer friends on the team to like, hey, you want to go, grab a bite to eat, and like we can discuss a couple things that have been on my mind. Just kind of share some stuff. I mean, it takes some vulnerability, I think, especially for guys to be able to like open up to somebody like that, or just like share like their concerns with what's happening. And so I do think we have to. There's some finagling that you have to do and trying to figure that out with what's best for you. But I can talk about my college, especially my college experience. My high school, not so much. I mean, like I said, I went to a small high school. It was a Christian high school. So yeah, there was obviously issues there, like locker room stuff, but like really not too much. So then when I went to college, like that was my first time like really experiencing a lot of these other things. And so I wanted to fit in right away. And so it was like, okay, like we're just gonna go. Everyone just goes drinking on a Friday night, like that's what everybody does, right? So that's what I did, and it was like, well, I want to be part of this, so like we're gonna, oh, this is the language that everyone's using, so like then my language adapted and things like that. And so,
Yeah.
um, I mean, even to the point where like, especially like later on in my college career, like some of the things that I were doing were seriously like negatively impacting like my performance on the field also. Like, you know, uh, whatever it might be was like lingering over onto the next day, or we had big games and I wasn't taking care of my body the way that I was supposed to. I wasn't taking care of my mind. I was putting like the fun stuff, I guess, if you want to put it that way. I was putting that above like just my work ethic and my training and things like that. So forget about the faith side, because in college I wouldn't have even called myself a Christian. And I just shared this with one of our colleges a month ago, one of the colleges that we have a huddle with. And I always kind of looked at it as, well, someday, I know who God is, and like I see people following him, but like I'll get there one day. Like I just want to kind of have my
Hmm.
fun now, right? Like it's four
Yeah.
years. Like let me just have it. I'm just gonna have my
Yeah.
fun, and then like and then I'll get serious about what that really means.
Yeah.
Like looking back, I see like how dangerous that actually was, and I'm praying that somebody listening to this episode is like having that same debate, or like maybe they had that same thought. Like that's dangerous. Like you're playing chess, or you're gambling essentially with your life, because
Yeah.
Scripture talks about how Jesus is coming back. We believe that, and we don't know the day, the time, or the hour, right? But He's going to be coming back, and then we're gonna have to be judged on what we've done. And so He could come back. He could have came back at any point in my college career, and I can guarantee you, like I was not going to be judged nicely on the way I was living my life. And so when I think about it that way, I'm like, man, like at any point, like I could have, been doomed, right?
Yeah.
So it's not something like, hey, I'm gonna push it off for another couple of years until I get to be more mature, until I'm an adult, and then I'll figure it out. Like, no, like I encourage you guys to do this now, right? And figure this out now and get right with God now, and pray, and ask for forgiveness, and then just pray of the opportunities or the people that He can bring into your life to surround you and support you in those circumstances. And it's not everybody is going to be in the locker room and saying stuff or standing up for everything wrong that's going on, right? We're not going to completely change a culture of poor language and
Sure.
sexualizing things and drinking and all those. We're not going to completely get rid of that stuff, but there is a difference between just not doing anything at all because you don't think you're going to change it, and living your life according to the way that it should be. And maybe then you'll have a couple other people that you can help out in that way. Um,
Yeah.
but I do think you're right. I do think you're going to see a lot of similarities from high school to college in this realm, but in college probably gets amplified a little bit more, right? Because people are drinking, people are partying, people are dating multiple people, people are saying a lot more things. Like there's no supervision, and a lot of even college coaches like they're like kind of encouraging that behavior because it's like, oh, they're college kids, like let's let them do whatever they want to do. They got to find themselves, things like that. So it
Yeah.
takes a good coach to kind of get those athletes on track. But it's definitely something where, if this is the first time you're really experiencing that, you can lose yourself very quickly. And that was definitely a huge piece of my life where I mean, I had some great times. I met some really cool people. But looking back,
Yeah.
man, I wish I could have done things a lot differently.
Yeah, dude, same. And I feel like the cool thing is like even looking back, I would say my experience is very, very similar. The whole time you're talking, like, yep, I get that. Very similar. Understand that. Like being able to see like God's protection and His faithfulness, even in my own like stupidity and my own like foolishness and like a lot of dumb choices that I made, especially in college. It was like you don't realize it in the moment, but you can like look back and see so many times where, oh, yep, God saved me there, kept me from that there. Like there was one time I remember, I think it was my freshman, yeah, it was my freshman year. It was towards the end of the year. One of the first like team parties that I had been to with a couple guys on the team. It was with I think it was one of the basketball teams on campus. The cops ended up showing up and getting called like later in the night, which was a very common occurrence there, which should have been enough to help a lot of us wisen up in the first place, but it wasn't. And but anyway, the cops ended up coming that night, so most of the people try to get out of the house, but there were a few of us that ended up like not being able to make it out of the house. So we're sitting there in the living room, and there's a few officers that are like talking to us, and they started asking everybody like how old they were. And I'm like, shoot, like I was a freshman, so I was like 18 at the time. And most of the other guys had gotten out of the house, and my phone's blowing up. I'm getting text messages from like a bunch of my teammates, and then eventually there were like there ended up being like a couple high school kids there. So once the officers realized that there were like a couple 17-year-olds, they were like, all right, we're gonna kind of let everybody else off the hook for the time being, but like you this group, you like get rides here right now and get home because this is like, unacceptable. So pretty much the rest of us got off the hook. And there was even one officer, it's a small town. So the one guy saw that there was another one of my teammates that was in the room with me wearing his baseball hat. So he saw our team hat, and he's like, oh, if I called your coach right now, he'd be happy to hear that he's got players getting into trouble. And I'm like, oh my gosh, now I'm going to get roped into this, and we're going to get like kicked off the team because of all the stuff that's going on. And so thankfully they let us go, and I get back to my own house where I had a few teammates waiting. They're like, "Oh my gosh, like if you would have been the one that got in trouble, we would have felt so bad. Like we're the ones that are usually doing most of this stuff, and like you're the one that got busted." And I'm like, "Guys, it's okay. Like, but we, probably should be more careful about how we're doing some of this stuff." But even in that, it's like you were saying, that could have been an underage, could have went on the record, could have been so many worse things. And that was just like one example of many that could pull from, where it's like I've seen like God really was able to redeem a lot of the bad choices that I made, that hopefully, again, someone that hears this also hears like it's okay if you've made mistakes, you're not like too far gone. It doesn't mean that you can't still like have a great relationship with God. It doesn't mean that he can't still use you in a lot of great ways, because even in a lot of those times where I was making some more poor choices, it was still in a way where I think a lot of the guys in the team at least understood like the background that I had, and the fact that I did have a relationship with God, even if I wasn't always living it out the best. It was still kind of in a way where like they saw that in me in some different ways. So by the time and this is kind of part of that, just seeing how God redeemed it throughout my time in college, by the time I got to like my senior year, when I was in a much better place just in my faith and my relationship with Christ, he just helped me grow a lot over those 4 years. There were actually a couple guys on the team that came up to me. It was like the first team meeting we had when we got back to school in the fall, and the one goes, "Hey, I want to start a Bible study this year with the team." Like totally out of nowhere. Like that was the first thing that he said to me after not seeing him all summer. And I was like, wow, like, yeah, I would definitely be interested. And I'm like, I've never really done it before, but he was like, yeah, I think that would be like good for us. And then me and this other dude were talking, and I'm like, who? So he said the other dude's name, and it was just two guys that I didn't really expect would ever be interested in something like that. And it just opened my eyes to like, there's probably even more guys on any given team that are open to God, like to God, or to wanting to know more about him, but you don't know it because you just kind of like assume things based on what people are doing, that it's like, oh, that person would never be interested. But had they not come up and said that, that it would have never happened. So we ended up meeting, it was four of us to start. It ended up growing to like 10 to 12 guys were meeting, if not every week, like every other week. And a few of those guys, like that I've stayed in touch with, I know they're like actively going to church, and they're like wanting to pursue Christ, all through like what I thought was, I'm like the only Christian here on the team. But it was like God was faithful the whole time to be able to use like, even me like making a lot of bad decisions, it still was like enough of a witness there that like we were able to get something going that's had like a lasting impact, not just
Yeah.
in my life, but some of their lives too. And
Yeah, I
so
mean, I think
you
you,
never know.
you, you nailed it right on the head. Is there's and this happens with a lot of athletes. I feel like, just to give you an example, when we started our huddle at Marist University, like the huddle leader was like, I'm really not sure how many people are going to show up. I don't even really know how many Christian athletes there really are on campus, but I know like two of my teammates want to come, so like let's do it. And next thing we knew, like by the second week, we had 30 kids there. He's like, oh, I never would have known this. And either of those were kids that were seeking something. There was just no opportunity, so they kind of kept quiet, or maybe it turned into some kids that were like, I never even thought about this, but that's maybe I'll give that a go, right? And so it really comes down to, are you? Sometimes you just have to be the person to like start it. Sometimes you just have to be the person to open up that door for somebody, and then you'll be surprised at who actually walks through it. And that can be, that can then be your group, and those people that you rely on, your support system.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about, so we had a great conversation about like our experiences, what that means, and some things that we can do to combat, those pressures. But let's actually look into what God's word says about, this stuff specifically. And so I have a couple verses here that I want to read, and then if you have any more you want to add to it. But the first one I have is Romans 12:2, and it says, "Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." Right? And so how we can apply this to our athletic world, right, is just the pattern of this world is always what we're told is evil, and what God chose us to stay away from. And so if it's just the culture of locker rooms, because that's what it's supposed to be, that's what the world is telling it to be, that right there should just kind of be like your red flag, like, okay, this is something probably that God does not want me to go down towards. And so how can I think differently? The second
Yeah.
one I had is 1 Corinthians 15:33, and it says, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. And I would say that was definitely me going into college. Like, I think I would say I had pretty good character going into college, but the company that I kept, I'm not saying that these people were bad, right? Like, I'm not saying they were evil people or anything, but the things that were around me, the company that I kept, really did change my character and made me go down that path that maybe I really should, not that maybe that I definitely should not have gone down. So see who's around you, who's influencing you. And then the last one I had was Galatians 1:10, which says, am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I
Mm,
trying to or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. And so I think that's a big one, right? Like, everything that we just talked about is just seeking the approval of people, of man, right? The people on our team, the people around us, and none of that stuff that we got ourselves into in trouble was
yeah.
ever approved, like was seeking approval from God, right? And we were just seeking the things around us. And Scripture right there tells us, hey, who are you playing for? Are you playing for the people here, or are you playing for me? Are you glorifying me with the talents that I've given you?
Yeah. No, it's so good because I feel like one of the unfortunate downsides of just like the nature of sports is that unless you're like really intentional about fighting against it, it's just a very like self-serving environment, like a self-serving culture. Like we as fans elevate the most successful athletes and we usually determine success based on like stats. So it's like we give the most credit and the most recognition to like the people with who win the most or have the best stats. And so as like a player, it's very easy to like see that and be like, well, I want to be successful. Like I want to be someone who is winning a lot, who does have good stats, even if you're not necessarily like explicitly doing it for like so that I can get the approval of other people. There's still like an internal, well, I don't want to be the one that's not good. I don't want to
Sure.
be the one that who's like on the bench the whole time. And whenever I get in, I'm bad because like you want to be successful, but it's just so easy for that. Like what can start as a good motivation of like wanting to contribute to the team, wanting to help the team win, to like you just start to get a taste of that. Like you have a good game, and then it's like, hey, great game, like you're really good, or you got a lot of potential, and then just it's a slippery slope to that becomes your motivation for playing, like you said, instead of that approval of God. So that's a great
Yeah.
point.
Um, and I do think like uh, there could be an outcome that we are like people are happy with what we're doing, right? Like not that we're trying to seek people's approval, but we could be doing things that other people enjoy, right? Like if we're talented on the field and we're producing, right, and we're a good athlete, like people are going to do that. People are going to like that. People want to come see us, and that's not a bad thing. But are you doing it for that reason, or are you working hard and you're playing to the best of your ability because you know that God gave you that ability,
Hmm.
right? And so obviously there's going to be a side effect of people enjoying that. And I mean, look at professional sports. We love to watch professional sports, but there's Christian players out there and athletes that like they're giving glory to God. They're playing because of that. And sure, fame and money and success comes with them just being great players, but they're rooted in who they are and they know that God gave them that platform. So just as we wrap up here, because we're about out of time, what's just some final words of encouragement? Maybe we have a high school athlete listening to this episode right now, and they're struggling with exactly this. What's just some final words of encouragement that you could give to them?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to jam a bunch into a short time here. This might be a part two type of thing because I feel like there's so much more we could unpack. Uh, man, as simple as it sounds, don't stop praying. Like, do not stop praying that God will continue to like strengthen your faith, but like be specific in your prayers. That's something that I'm learning even in my current life is to like be specific about the things that you're praying about. And one of those things is that for a Christian athlete is like if you feel isolated or you feel like you're kind of like you don't have other friends that maybe have the same values as you, pray that God will give you those people like over and over and over and don't stop until he does because going back more specifically to my college experience, I remember like just feeling very isolated the first couple of years, and praying that God. I remember just nights where I'm like, God, can you just give me one person? Like, give me one person that knows you, that also wants to follow you, just so I don't feel so alone doing this. And eventually, like by my soft or my junior year, I ended up like changing living arrangements, and I moved in with a different teammate, and it was basically just me, him, and one of his friends. And it was around that time my teammate that I moved in with had like just come to Christ. He had like just started to have an interest. I think he kind of came from a little bit of a faith background, um, but had been through some tough stuff earlier on in his life, and just was kind of coming back, and I just seeing God work in his life and just totally transforming his life into who he is today. He's still one of my best friends today. That was the thing that I felt like helped me the most, wanting to starting to pursue God again, was like seeing him work in one of my friends' lives at the time where I needed it too. Like that gave me someone that was almost on the same level. It was like he was kind of new to his faith, but I was in a place where I was like I hadn't been walking with God and was trying to start again. So we almost just kind of walked side by side, and like just having one person that I remember, he was like, "Hey, I know you go to church. Like, would you care if I went with you sometime?" I'm like, "Man, I feel like I've been going alone for like 3 years now, so I'd love to have someone like go with me, or when I even went in general, because I hadn't been going for a while." So just having like one person made all the difference. And now he's like a brother to me. So it's like going from feeling like I didn't have anybody to then having one of my best friends and having that grow to even more guys on the team.
Yeah, you guys were
It's just,
able to link arms over this.
yeah, 100%. A brother is born for times of adversity. I think it says that in Proverbs. So it's like, don't give up on praying for that if you feel like God's not like providing that for you yet, because you never know when it's just right around the corner. Um, and then I think just the biggest thing, real quick, just to make it quick, is like have a sense of humility too, because I think the part of the issue for me was just a very like black and white view of the world growing up. Like if you're a Christian, you're good. If you're not a Christian, you're bad. And I think the other thing that, especially going to college and having some different life experience helped me with was like just because someone doesn't know God yet doesn't mean that they're any like worse than you. And that was something that God has continuously just like humbled me in my life, is that um like you can't expect people who don't know God to act as if they do.
Hmm.
And you also need to remember that like even as someone who knew God, I was doing a lot of the same things that they were doing. So it's like I can't look at somebody else and be like, oh, well, I don't want to be like them because they're bad. And I'm like high and mighty and self-righteous because I believe that Jesus gave his life for me. Like, I have to have a humility in myself to say, like, maybe there's reasons why a person, there's always reasons people make the decision that they do or believe what they believe. But it's like, if you're not willing to like give somebody some grace and like not judge them for the things that they do, you might actually get to know them a little bit better, to the point where like you can actually connect with them on a level where they might be open to hearing about what you believe. But I think for a lot of my life, I was just quick to write people off, like, oh, you drink, you smoke, you're hooking up with people, like you're bad, like you're not following God. When in reality, it's like, who am I to judge you for doing those things whenever I've done a lot of those same things? And like God's forgiven me of so much, but I'm not willing to extend that to somebody else. And I feel like the more that God's helped me grow in that area, I've been way more effective in like sharing my faith and like connecting with those people, just because they don't feel judged immediately, and like they feel like it's a safer space that they can be honest about where they're at. So yeah, just don't lose sight of the fact that God definitely needs to be your top priority, and like you never know when you're going to have an opportunity to make a difference in someone's life. But it's hard it's hard to do it whenever you look exactly like that person and they don't see anything different about you. So don't be ashamed to be different. Don't be scared to be different, because ultimately I think that that'll be the thing that gives you opportunities to really um, make a difference for Christ when people really need it. So
Absolutely. You probably would have wrote me off if we knew each other in college.
likewise, me and you both.
Yeah. Um, Well, hey Brandon, thanks for jumping on with us today. And maybe you're right. Maybe there is a part two to this that we can kind of continue this conversation because I do think it's probably one of the most relevant things that we see in our ministry of FCA when we're dealing with college and even high school athletes. So, thanks for joining on with us today. And listen, for anyone who's listening today, if you just need some support, if you're looking for mentorship, if you're just looking for some resources for yourself, or maybe a small group on your team, or the entire team, reach out to us at FCA. Check out the website, fca.org. Check out fcaresources.com, has devotionals for you. You can choose by sport. Those things might just be a little spark that you need in your personal life or in your small group life to bring your team to focus on God the way that maybe you're hoping that they will. So we're happy to help in any way with that. Find a local FCA rep. Let us get involved. Let us help you through whatever it might be that you're dealing with, and we're happy to do so. But yeah, Brandon, thank you again for hopping on with us and sharing a lot of your story today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, guys, we will see you next week.